Everyone has a story, but not everyone gets to tell it. Life gets busy. We talk, we text. But do we listen? Are you looking for real stories, raw and unchanged? Want to experience life through another's eyes, one story at a time? Daniel and Jenny have you covered. It's time to start the conversations, and that's the #truth.
Joining us now is novelist and writing coach John DeDakis. John is the author of 5 novels in the Lark Chadwick mystery-suspense-thriller series. His 4th novel, Bullet in the Chamber, contains a subplot that fictionalizes the accidental heroin overdose that killed his youngest son, Stephen, in 2011. John's novels are set with a journalism backdrop and are drawn from personal experience, including the suicide of his sister in 1980. John DeDakis, welcome to our show. We're so thankful to have you here today.
Thank you very much. Here. Thanks, Daniel and Jenny. It's great to be with you.
So you have been a journalist for 45 years, including a stint in the White House as a correspondent. And for 7 years, you were one of Wolf Blitzer's editors on CNN. How has journalism evolved over the years? And are you at all concerned?
Oh my, well, that's the whole show right there. Journalism has evolved incredibly in the last 100 years, primarily because of the technology, which has enabled the news to get out there more quickly. And so we are now at a point with, satellites and the internet and so on, where the news cycle is no longer, a day or whatever. It's moment by moment. Mm-hmm. And I think that we are now at a point where anyone who has a cell phone has the potential of being a publisher. But the problem is, and this is what concerns me, the problem is there's no one on your shoulder saying, like an editor at a news organization, there's no one on your shoulder saying, how do you know that's true? Where did you get that? Okay. Yeah. So consequently, when you hit send, you're a publisher. And I don't think people realize the awesome responsibility that comes with that. Or on the other hand, I think too often people are too cavalier about that, and they don't care whether they're transmitting the truth or not. And so I'm very concerned that there are lies out there. There always have been lies out there, but the mechanism for checking things out is now suspect. And I mean, in journalism school, they told us, if your mother tells you she loves you, check it out. And nowadays, it's whatever sounds good must be true. Or, if it's going to sabotage my opponent, then it must be true. Mm-hmm. So we're in dangerous territory right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely a lot of information going on out there. And you're 100% right. You never know what's going to come across the airways. And how do you know if that is been verified, which
you can know to a certain extent, because there are news organizations that have editorial oversight built into them. For instance, the Associated Press, it's been around since probably 1850. And so it has a long history of editorial oversight. So if you have any doubts about the mainstream media, go to the Associated Press, because it's solid. It's just the facts, ma'am.
Yep. Just like the old show.
There you go.
Yep. Now, how has that played into your most recent novel that you've written, Fake?
Well, interesting that you would ask that. Nice segue. It's Fake. I write as a woman, which is a whole nother conversation, but my protagonist is a White House correspondent. She's a young woman in her mid-20s. She happens to be a White House correspondent for the Associated Press. Full disclosure, I never worked at the AP. I just respect it as a news organization. So, Lark is at the top of her game at the White House, and she is covering a president who is probably a lot like Justin Trudeau. And that president is dealing with a Russian president who's probably a lot like Donald Trump. And this is the Me Too era. So she is dealing with all kinds of stuff going on there, and she is struggling to be an objective reporter. At the same time, she is a woman, and a young woman who's very sensitive as a human being, and she becomes the victim of fake news. And so what I wanted to do was to show the consequences of when deliberate falsehoods are spread.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's heavy duty.
Was there a specific moment that inspired that for you when you said, okay, enough, I need to put a book out about this?
Yes, that moment was when Donald Trump declared when he was elected president. I started to write it when Trump was elected. I did not write it to be an anti-Trump polemic, but I did write it because he was spouting this thing about journalists being the enemies of the American people. I know that's not true. I mean, there are journalists risking their lives right now in Ukraine, trying to counter the fake news that's being put out by the Kremlin. So journalists put their lives on the line for the truth. And for that, and I mean, you know, it wasn't just that he was going after the press, because he went after every institution, the judiciary, you name it, the intelligence community, the military. But it was very troubling. And so that was my aha moment. I've got to tell this.
Yeah. And when you were putting that book together, was that easy to tie into the books that you had already published?
It was, because my protagonist is a journalist. I mean, the very first novel, she's trying to figure out what to do with her life. She's a college dropout, dropped out because she'd been sexually assaulted by her English professor. And so the book begins when she discovers the body of the aunt who raised her from infancy, and that launches her on a quest to find out more about her past. And so she gets a newspaper clipping about the car train collision that orphaned her, and so she solves the mystery by becoming a journalist. And so by the time I wrote Fake, Lark Chadwick is my protagonist. She's already a White House correspondent. And so it was inertia, I suppose, that drew me to be able to continue the story, but with hoping to make it a timely tie-in with what's going on.
I know, I'm thinking about it, and I can't imagine what it must be like to have invested your entire career, your entire life. I mean, you have 45 years in.
I know, I'm old. I know, you don't have to rub it in there.
That's not what I said. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, that's a long time to, really take the oath of integrity, and like you said, trying to uncover that truth. And here's somebody attacking that entire institution of something that you've poured your life's work into.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, I'm not unique in that. I mean, every institution that was attacked, there were people who were aghast and trying to defend the integrity of the organization.
So Lark, she's a woman. You decided to write from her perspective.
Right.
Is there anybody who inspired her character in your life?
Yes. Oh, sure. I mean, I think any novelist will tell you that they are inspired by people within their lives, but journalists or novelists will also tell you that you write what you know. And so when I first started writing, when I knew I was going to do fiction, and that's a struggle, because just the fact, I mean, it's a firing offense to make stuff up. And so it took a while to get the courage to actually go out on a limb and make things up. And when I started to play with fiction, it was suggested to me that I should write in a way that stretches who I am. Never been a woman, at least not in this life. So I gave it a try. But what I discovered is that emotions aren't gender specific. We all have the exact same emotions. It's just that in my experience, the women are much more interesting than the guys. No offense, Daniel, but the women, the women, maybe you even will agree with this. The women in my life are articulate about their emotions. They're willing to share them. The emotional palette that they're drawing from is much more nuanced than the one I have. I've got anger nailed, but the women in my life, much broader spectrum. So women were just more interesting to me.
Yeah.
So, and then I would ask them questions, and this is 25 years worth of young women at CNN who were, new hires and interns, and they'd tell me their stories about their boyfriends and their careers and their families. So I just internalized a lot of that. So when it came time to writing, it's like, Lark is basically me with a skirt on, only she hates skirts. She wears jeans. But you draw from what you know. And so sure, she's inspired a lot by people in my life, but I know myself and my emotions. And so that's really where I think a lot of her authenticity comes from.
Now, do you think that you were always more sensitive or more in tune with that plight that a woman had, or did that come to you through the
No. I was a student at the University of Wisconsin in Madison in the late 60s when Playboy magazine voted UW the #1 party school in the country. So it was my job, my mission to be the #1 partier. So no, I saw women as conquests, not as friends and people who might actually be able to teach me a thing or two about being human. So no, it evolved over time and a lot of trial and error.
Yeah. If you're thinking about then versus now, if you had, maybe 3 tips to give guys out there of things that you learned, what first comes to your mind?
Well, again, how long do you have? Probably the thing I've learned the most is that I think guys make a huge mistake by trying to impress a woman with how much they make, what their title is. In my experience, based on the guys that I know, they'll put a woman on a pedestal. And they'll say how beautiful she is, as if that's her defining characteristic. And, the beautiful women I know are bored with that kind of accolade because they hear it all the time. And what they really want is someone who recognizes that they have a mind, that they have a brain, that they have, that they have a lot more substance than how they look. So I think that that's probably tip number 1 is to recognize that they are a whole person and it's not to be your plaything. I would say listen, ask questions, be vulnerable, because guys are brought up, and again, it's probably not wise to make a generalization, but I think that in general, guys tend to be a little nervous about showing emotions and vulnerability. They got to be the tough guy.
That's true. I agree with that.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean,
Absolutely.
I think it's true, and yet, I think if we allow women, if we listen to the women in our lives, and I mean really listen, not just yes dear, but really listen, I think that they have so much to teach us. And so I think that's probably tip number 2. I don't know if I have a third tip. I think those are 2 full-time jobs right
ones.
there.
Those are very important, and that communicates a lot.
Now, if I were suddenly to take on the task that you did and decided to write a book from a male's perspective, what do you think I might get wrong? I had read up.
I'm not so sure you would get anything wrong, because I again, this is probably sexist and too much generalizing, but I think women in general are very intuitive. And I teach writing, and so there are times when some women I have people write in the voice of the opposite sex, and women have told me they don't understand men, and yet when I read their writing, they get them completely, because it's like they don't understand why they're so quiet, why they're so unwilling to share, but there's an intuition that understands that. And the wise woman is the woman who's able to, break through the surface and get the guy talking. So my hunch is, especially because you've got training as a social worker, how to ask questions. I think that I think that you probably would do a good job writing as a man because you already are open to other people.
Well, I mean, it could be fun, I guess. It's something I don't know.
Well, but I mean, if you're going to write a novel, let's hope you're going to have people of both genders, or even, you know, several genders in between, you know, in there, because that's the human experience. There was one guy who took one of my writing classes, and he said, and this is a quote, he said, "I do not understand women, therefore I don't write them." And I'm thinking,
Wait, you
man, your
mean
books,
at all?
yeah,
At all?
no, he writes just from a total, you know, all his characters are men.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I know. I
I don't,
know.
I don't even
Just
know
want to
how you
take the
would do
risk.
that.
I don't think he's been published. I don't think he's been published yet, and I think there's a reason why.
Now, is your wife one of your beta readers?
She wasn't at first. Well, I take that back. Probably one of the first mistakes I made in terms of beta readers is, and now my advice is, you know, if you're looking for a beta reader, try to find someone with whom you don't share a bed or a last name, because the danger is that they'll either be so affirming that they won't be any help. They'll say, "Oh my God, it should be a movie," which is great. And you need to hear that, but you also need to hear what's not working. And the other downside is, you know, someone very close to you, like a spouse, could also break your spirit. And in my case, my first novel, I think the first draft was like 150,000 words. It was a mishmash. And I, you know, gave it to Cindy because she loves me and, you know, she'll tell me the truth. Out of 150,000 words, she underlined one and said, "Are you sure you want to use that word?" Well, that was very helpful, but it, you know, there are a few other words in there. And years later, she said, I didn't want to break your spirit because I didn't know if you were any good. So I didn't really want to say too much." So
Yeah.
now she was a very helpful reader on Fake and helped bring it in for a safe landing. So I trust her judgment much more now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I read Bullet in the Chamber, John.
Oh my.
I
And we're
didn't
still on streaking terms.
I did I didn't read Fake, but I'd like to say, to go along with what we're saying right now about men and women, I found the conversations just so darn believable.
Thank you.
Between Lark and Doug, her kind of boyfriend, but then he turns into her. Just the male female aspect, the dynamic, the way he pulled away, the way she was frustrated. That was just so darn believable. It was easy to relate to because
My goodness.
it was so good.
Thank you. That means a lot. I appreciate that.
And aside from relationships, the book was really good.
Thank you.
I felt like you hit the accelerator when her and the Doug's boss started going at it together.
Wait, spoiler alert.
Oh, sorry. No, I just
So
hey,
far so good. He's doing fine.
Yeah, and then
I'm not even sure what he's talking about at this point. So.
you're not. Oh, okay. And then a few chapters later, not only was the accelerator hit, but it was floored, and it just took off. I was like, wow.
Whoa, thank you. Well, that's the way it's supposed to be. And since, you know, we haven't met until this moment, that means, and especially a lot, because you know, you didn't know me from Adam, and that reaction really means a lot, because that's what writers try to do. The goal is to get you to turn the page, not to turn out the light.
You did that.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, he did. You know, we ordered the book and I didn't even get the opportunity to pick it up because he took it.
I took it. I just
took it to read on his lunch break and devoured it. And every day he'd come home and he would say, "Oh my gosh, this is so good." He's like, "This needs to be a movie," you know. So you said your wife was like, you know, or you said a wife could say, you know, "Hey, this should be a movie." But Dan said, "Wow, this could really be a movie." Very suspenseful. And I haven't finished through it yet. I have just started because, like I said, he took it right off my stand.
So the jury is still out with you, and I accept that.
I'm sure it's fabulous. What I've read so far is great. And you know, you bring a lot of your true life into your writing, and Bullet in the Chamber brings a very painful experience that you had in the losing your son, and you're writing about that in this book. What was that like for you?
Well, I cried pretty much the whole time I wrote it. In fact, my son was 22 years old. He went missing for a week back in August of 2011. And I knew that I was pretty sure it was not going to end well, and it didn't. He was found dead in my car about a block and a half from home, dead of an accidental heroin overdose. And I knew heroin was going to be a factor because just within the month, he had revealed to me his addiction, and we were talking and working through trying to, get beyond it. But I came up with the image of a bullet in the syringe, which became the cover image for the book. And writing it was, I started writing it not long after he died, but it was too soon. And I went through grief counseling for probably 2.5 years and finally was able to face it and go through it. And a lot of the situations that were going on around the time of his disappearance and discovery, I wrote into the novel as a subplot. And so it was a catharsis. And I also hoped that it would, I don't know, lance a boil or destigmatize the issue, because my first novel deals with suicide. My sister killed herself in 1980. So again, I wrote from personal pain because our society tends to try to anesthetize pain. And good writers, I believe, move toward the pain and access it in a way that is, I believe, or what I hope will be helpful for other people, because you don't have to scratch very deeply in anyone to find pain and loss and sorrow, but it's so intense that it's isolating. And a person who's going through it feels, I think, often as if they're the only ones who feel this way and that there's no one else who understands. And there are plenty of people who understand if you'll give them an opportunity. So, being able to write about that was sort of an exercise in faith and hope, I guess.
Yeah.
And when you experience such a loss and such a deep grief, to put that in words is hard. I think that a lot of times when you experience something like that, people will ask, how are you, or how are things going? And you don't have a word that fits an emotion that deep.
Yes.
And so finding those words to put that into a story, one, yes, is painful, but two, also takes a lot of skill and self-reflection.
It does. Thank you. And I think that it's more than just finding a word. You actually use the word story. I think that when you take that experience and live it out through your characters, that brings it to life, so that it's not so much articulating the feeling as demonstrating the feeling.
That makes sense.
When you have your book out there and people are reading that personal experience, you are giving a gift to people, because like you said, other people go through similar things, but they might not know how to talk about it or how to find those words, those stories to share. Have you heard that feedback from people, hey, this was really helpful to me, I was going through A, B, or C?
I have. And one of the things that happens in Fake, which is a continuation of the series, Fake is the book that follows Bullet in the Chamber that Daniel just read and that you're reading. Lark is having grief counseling sessions. So in a sense, you are sitting with Lark as she is trying to articulate her feelings. So again, we're demonstrating it. And again, and in many ways, it is an echo of what I experienced as well. So I do get that kind of feedback, that kind of affirmation, but I know instinctively you can't please everyone. And mercifully, the people who hated it haven't told me that yet. So, but I'm grateful for the response that it's gotten, and I hope that it continues to, have a long life out there, and that I can continue to contribute to the canon.
There was a powerful part that really stood out to me when I don't want to spoil anything, so I'll try to be a little vague, but as she's very first, as Lark is kind of in her first moments of recognizing that this person that she cares about is dead, and she is trying there, she has to identify the body.
Right.
And somebody hands her a grief brochure.
Right.
And she kind of tosses it aside because, well, I mean, I could interpret why, but do you want to talk a little bit about
Sure.
that moment and writing that statement? Because it seemed really powerful when I was reading it.
You know, it's interesting. No one's ever really commented on that moment. And to be honest with you, that moment was almost a throwaway, just like, you know, Lark tosses aside the brochure, but it's an echo of what actually happened. I mean, when I went to identify my son's body at the DC morgue, there was a person from the Went Center for Loss and Healing, and they had literature, but they were very discreet, very low key, gave me the literature and then backed off. And I brought the literature home, and it was sat on the dining room table for weeks. My wife read it, I would read it, we'd pick it up, we wouldn't talk about it, and then we put it back down. So I don't know, I've never talked about this before, so I guess the identifying the body was certainly traumatic. And I'm groping here, Jenny, because I don't know if I can really pinpoint the significance of it other than, here's the moment. Here's the significance of it. And that is that it didn't require me to respond at the moment. I was able to take it. It was in writing. Because our emotions change. And so having something written, and I think the Bible is like this too. And I've always wondered, from like Jesus Christ Superstar, there's a line in there, you know, why did you come at a time when there was no mass communication? That's a brilliant question. And I think it's because, you know, when you write it down, when you write things down, writing has a way of getting inside you in a way that personal conversation doesn't necessarily. And so, and when you come at it and you read it, you're in different places emotionally when you read the same words. So I may not have been receptive at that moment, but I became receptive at some point when we realized after weeks had gone by, it still hurts. And I don't know why, and I don't know what to do with it, and I don't know where to go with it. So thank you for letting me grope with an answer there, because I've never been asked that question before, but I think that's what was going on there. And maybe that's why it moved you, or it stood out to you.
Yeah. I mean, it just, you know, it made it in, you know, it was this piece of something flying at you in the midst of chaos, in the midst of tragedy, in the midst of things swirling past your brain a million miles an hour. And then all of a sudden there's a flash of this and a flash of that, and all those pieces that your mind takes in this moment of, you know, your whole world being shaken and torn apart. But it was notable. And so it stood out to me.
What was it about it that stood out for you? Because I know you've, you know, dealt with these kinds of things as well. So what was it that allowed you to relate to it?
I think probably a few different things, but one is, like I said, just the fact that it made it in. When you're in fight or flight response, you pull in the information that seems most important. And so the mind has a way of kind of picking out those pieces. There, you know, you have to dig deeper to kind of find the ones that don't stand out. And so the fact that stood out, you know, here's this person that comes and hands you a brochure, could be something that stands out for a positive reason or a negative reason, but it stood out. So it stood out to me.
Okay. Well, and you're a social worker. And of course, my grief counselor was a social worker. So, you know, I have a warm spot in my heart for that profession.
Yeah. Well, we certainly have a warm spot in our heart for yours as well. Covering the truth and writing truth, and, you know.
Thank you. Well, there aren't as many people who feel that way anymore. So that means a lot. Thank you.
Now, you mentioned the Bible and faith. Did that help you through all of this? What role did faith play for you?
That's another convoluted long answer. I was raised in the Episcopal Church. My parents were, you would say, pillars of the church. I mean, my mom taught Sunday school. My dad was on the leadership council. Um, and I went to church all the time. By the time I got to college and Playboy magazine took over, faith was sort of like, my upbringing was sort of like too much mumbo jumbo. So I was starting to head toward atheism by that time. And this was in the late 60s, the anti-Vietnam War, the summer of love, a lot of turmoil, a lot of internal turmoil and societal turmoil. Just about that time, Campus Crusade for Christ was making a big appeal. And one of their pitches was that Jesus was a revolutionary, which he was. He was basically going against the religious establishment, and it got him killed. So I responded to that. And even though the message of, you're a sinner, you need to be saved was simplistic, the thing that resonated with me was that the guy who led me to the Lord said, Jesus, promised that you would have life and have it abundantly. He said, that doesn't mean pie in the sky when you die necessarily. It means life here and now as well. And that was relevant to me. What happens later, we'll find out soon enough. What matters to me is the here and now. If it's not relevant now, it's not any good. So I responded. There was a 2-year hiatus where I was still trying to figure out what that meant, which meant that I probably became more hedonistic than before. The typical conversion story is, you see the light, everything turns out great. Nope. I almost killed myself. I mean, it got that intense because I didn't see any meaning in life. And it wasn't until I was in the Army and my roommate, Dennis Dudley, had a Bible. And I had mentioned sort of in an offhand way, I'm a Jesus freak. I had no idea what I meant. And so he said, just a minute. He went and he got his Bible and I'm going, oh, great. And he opens up to the 23rd Psalm and he says, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Now, why is a rod and thy staff comforting? Got me, man. And he said, it's because, God loves us and he gives us discipline, and that's comforting to be able to be, guided. And that was my introduction to understanding the Bible, at least, a little bit on a daily basis. So fast forward now, okay? That did begin to turn my life around. There was stability. But then we get to a point where, you're faced with, this major tragedy where, my son had not made any kind of spiritual commitment. So as far as I know, he made a conscious decision not to receive Christ. So does that mean he's in hell? Some evangelicals would say yes, but the Bible uses imagery of God being a father. So I'm a dad. I knew that my son was in danger using heroin, and I didn't go off on him. I didn't banish him from the family. Yeah. So if I, who is imperfect, have that kind of response, why would I want to, give my life to a deity who's going to be all hung up on whether I say the right magic words? So I guess that my faith, which was already there, expanded, maybe. I became more aware that spirituality is more than just doctrine. It's not doctrinaire. It's spirituality. It's about, the universe and God, which is certainly, an imperfect word to put on something that's so vast and unknowable. To put it in a box was not something I was content to do. And yet I have to say that everything that had preceded in my life that had brought stability was still there. I had probably become unmoored from my faith, but I still knew where the pier was. So, that was 10 years ago. I'm now at a place where, and I'll say one more thing and then I'll shut up. I've been very discouraged by the evangelical embrace of Donald Trump. You know, these used to be people who cared about family values until someone who seemed to be the antithesis of family values, you know, said some stuff that they agreed with, and they, for reasons of power, wanted him in office, and they were willing to look the other way. Well, we're not electing a pope. No, but you want someone who's got integrity. And so I would say I no longer identify as an evangelical because of the evangelicals who went for Trump.
Well, it's hard to understand, but
well, and I think there are three things to understand about it. One of my good friends, David Aikman, was Time Magazine's Beijing and Moscow bureau chief. Oxford educated, brilliant guy, was a Trump supporter. And for probably a month or two early in 2017 or 18, we went back and forth and had essays on Facebook that people weighed in on.
I'm sure
And,
that was...
you know, I mean, you know, he doesn't consider me a friend anymore, but we had some very civil back and forth conversations. And my takeaway was that it really, with him, it became doctrine. It became, you know, socialism versus capitalism versus democracy. You know, it became evangelical doctrine versus, you know, living a life of integrity. And I think another factor that's what's going on, and this will never probably be stated, you know, bluntly, but I think there's a lot of racism going on. You know, the Christian church does not have a great track record when it comes to slavery and enslavement of other people. Yes, the civil rights movement was motivated by, you know, a Christian minister, but you know, there were plenty of slaveholders who were Christians as well. So Christianity, and I think that there is a remnant and a vein of racism within the Christian church that I think continues to try to suppress the vote, the black vote. But they'll say it's now all about socialism or vote fraud or stuff like that. But I think at its root, it's racism.
Yeah.
Going back to what you said about you're a father and God is a father, for some reason that has also has become a big part of my thinking lately more than ever, is that God is our father and he's created each person. So as any of us look to another person in a very real sense, like that's my brother, that's my sister. So if each person, just you took the label off of each person, whether it's a political label, whether it's a label of their economic prosperity or their poverty, if you just take all that off and you look down in the distance or whatever, whether I like that person or not, that is my brother, that is my sister, which transforms our mind into something to say nothing else matters. So let's put everything else aside. So
I am really glad you said that, because I agree 100%. One of the things that's been, I mean, I'm a common ground kind of person. I mean, that's the way I worked as a reporter. You know, it's fundamental that you go and get the other point of view. You know, even if you disagree with it, you know, it's on you to let the other side give it their best shot. And as a citizen trying to reach common ground, you know, we have a two-party system, and it's you know, there are strengths in that, and it's good that we have a two-party system. And going one step further, my takeaway from this awful last 4 or 5 years is that I no longer believe that I'll be able to find common ground politically, at least in the short term, but I can find common ground even with a Trump supporter, because we care about our families, we care about our kids, we care about our health, our prosperity, our country. And so there's plenty of ground where we can find not only commonality, but that's where we meet each other in our humanity as well. So thank you. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that's the only way forward in this.
Because
Well,
humanity is
thank
something
you
that
for
affects
bringing
us
it up.
all, right? We're all
Yes,
human.
there you go. There you go. Exactly.
When you're writing your books, I know you had brought in you said you write what you know. So there's political components, there's journalistic components, you have real life components coming into your work. And I know you've said that that's been hard because you're used to kind of not doing fiction, but doing, here's the facts, here's what we know to be true. But now you're kind of, I know you got another project that's going to be coming, which is going to kind of swing that pendulum back in the other direction a little bit. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
I think you're talking about the memoir I'm
Yes.
writing.
Yes.
Thank you. I've just finished the second draft today.
Oh,
I cut about 25,000 words out of it, so it's getting closer to being readable and coherent. And the working title is Pivot Points: A Life of Plot Twists, because what I teach my writing students is life doesn't turn out the way you expect. In real life, it's a crisis. In journalism, it's a story, but in fiction, it's a plot twist. And we all have plot twists, and that's in essence what fiction is. It's, one thing happens and you react to it, and then the next thing happens and you react to that, and someone reacts to you, and so on. That's the way life is lived. That's the way stories play out. And so I've identified several pivotal moments in my life. So writing it has been it's been good because it's given me some clarity because I am so old. And so I've got a lot to look back on and try to make sense of. And so, because I've had to dig through some old journals that I was keeping back then. And, there was so much I'd forgotten. And so being able to be reminded of significant moments in my life where I poured my emotions in there, but once they're in the journal, I'm not feeling them anymore. They're siphoned off.
okay.
So it was good to go back and make sense of all of that. And you're right. I mean, I've got to be true. I've got to be factual, but I don't need to be, I have to be able to pick and choose the salient facts that underline the truths, the capital T truth that needs to be told. So I'm selective about the small T truth mosaic tiles, that I put in there.
So was that something you always wanted to do since you started writing, was to dive in and do a memoir, or did that come later in the game?
No, that's much later. No, I mean, my very first writing was nonfiction. I was going to write a biography of a friend of mine who was murdered in South Georgia.
Mm.
And I did a lot of travel. I did a lot of interviews. But in my research, I dug up a lot of stuff about him that troubled the family.
Mm.
And so they asked me to put it on hold. My wife suggested, well, maybe you should fictionalize this. And so I ended up taking a lot of my research and pouring it into my first novel. So I think it was a long arc, a long bending toward fiction, which still takes a lot of, you're still drawing from reality, but you also have license to embellish in order to make it entertaining. So I'm now comfortable in both camps.
Mhm. Well, any release date on that at this point?
Well, we don't even know if anybody's going to want to. I went to my agent and I said, "So this is what I'm doing now." She said, "Yeah, you should self-publish that." So
Really?
yeah, I mean, look, I'm not well known. I'm not an ex-president. I'm not a movie star. So I'm a relative unknown. I'm the person about whom Stephen King once said, "Who?" So who's going to want to read this? So
I
I
was,
may I may end up self-publishing it. I don't know. It's way too soon to tell. So don't hold your breath yet.
I can say I love that title. If
Pivot points.
yes, a
Thank you.
lifetime, well, pivot points, a lifetime of
Plot twists.
plot twist. If I were in a bookstore and looking at a big row of book spines and I saw that title, I'd pull it off to take a second look.
Thank you.
That title,
Well,
that title grabs me. I love it.
I'll put you in touch with my publicist. She doesn't like it.
Have them call. Yeah, I'll take the call.
Thank you. Thanks.
I mean, I would love to read it as well. And you have experienced so much and you've had a lot of different things in your life, and you really take the effort to relate to people and to get, information out there. So just really appreciate that in your writing.
Thank you.
Anything that you want to share, maybe that we haven't asked?
I don't think so. You've given me a tremendous opportunity to, to spout off. I think it's probably better if I shut up.
It's actually better if you keep talking.
If there's anything else you want to know, I'm certainly open.
So I have a couple rapid fire fun ones that I'd like to ask.
Rapid fire is never fun, but let's try it.
So your
You can
wife,
see my body language already.
your wife you met in the choir when you joined the choir.
Yep.
Did you join the choir because your wife was the choir director, or did you meet her after?
I joined the choir just to get involved, and a year later, she became the new choir director.
Okay.
Nice. And so you both are musical. And
well, she's the musician. I play drums poorly and sing even worse than that. So she married me in spite of my musicianship.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like the musical gene, though, runs in the family a little bit.
It does. My son James is a professional drummer. He's branching off into other things as well, but he's a creative. My daughter Emily has a PhD in creative writing. She's working over in Belfast, Northern Ireland, in a number of writing projects, and sings in a. I know she has done singing in different church choirs. I'm not sure if she's singing right now, but she's very gifted that way as well.
Yeah. Oh, so you guys have kind of that shared love of writing a bit.
Right, and creativity. In fact, Emily, our on Facebook for our Facebook Messenger, Emily created the page Talent Family.
Now, has she ever brought you into class like, hey, here's my dad, he can teach us, a little bit about journalism or this or that?
She did when she was the editor of the school paper at Tulane University, the Hullabaloo, and she brought Carol Costello and I in to speak to the journalism students. Carol and I worked together at CNN, and then after my first novel was published, or maybe it was the second, Emily brought me to a bookstore in Belfast. So, every now and then she, hauls me out and dusts me off. I'd love to collaborate with her someday. Someday I think we will. I hope so.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Yeah.
Do you still teach at all?
Oh yeah, I'm teaching a lot. I was just the writer in residence at the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland last week.
Yeah.
at a retreat center, and this coming week I start another series, six Wednesday nights, on becoming a master writer. So yeah, I'm teaching a lot, and that's my comfort zone.
Yeah, teaching.
Yeah, teaching, coaching, all of that.
Yeah.
So
if you're thinking back about all these different things you've done, because you have had your hand in a lot of different pots, which one brings you the most joy?
Well, the teaching does, but it's only because there's give and take. There's Q&A, there's, I'm able to respond to what a person's question and need is. So that dynamic is encouraging, and it's ideal when it's one-to-one, because then you really can go deep. So one-to-ones or small group types of things are best. Speaking to a big group is not as much fun because it feels superficial. It feels like it's only one-sided. So I much prefer the give and take. So yeah.
And now, do you do a podcast?
I do. I have. It's infrequent, but it's called One to One with John DeDakis. Although when it actually airs, it's One to One with whoever I'm interviewing. I do it pretty much as a live stream thing on Facebook and simultaneously on YouTube. And then after it's over, I'm able to take the link and put it on LinkedIn, and then I'll send it to whoever I interviewed and they can put it on their website or whatever. So, this means that I don't have to do pre-production or, any kind of production time. It's live, and whatever happens, happens. And
you just roll with it. Where do people find you?
They can find me best online. On my website has a way of getting to me by email as well. The problem, of course, is that with a name like DeDakis, you've got to have pen and paper available to write it down. So it's basically my name, John, John, DeDakis, D as in dog E, D as in dog A, KIS as in Sam.com.
Wonderful. And you have 5 books available.
Yes, ma'am.
1 on the way.
Yes, ma'am. Ish. 2 on the way if you count the book 6 in the series, but that's still percolating.
And there you have it with John DeDakis.